Welcome to the Exit Point podcast. I'm Laurent Fratt, and with me is Matt Blank. And today we're speaking with Chris Byrnes, who is a super talented wingsuit base jump pilot. And we're here to talk to him about a few things today. One, he is a very successful competitive wingsuit skydiver and base jumper. We want to talk to him a little bit about his competition record and what it took to get there. And lately he's been opening some super spicy wingsuit points, and he's just a super stoked dude whose excitement is contagious, and we're really looking forward to talking today about that. Matt, you don't know Chris personally. What are some of the things that you're interested in talking about with him today?
Well, first and foremost, I'd love to talk to him about what it means to be a good wingsuiter. In the past, that's been pretty subjective, and now with things like Skyderby, which are putting down metrics and categories to try and define what a good wingsuiter is, I'd like to talk to him about how he perceives those quantifiable metrics, since he is the one that is topping the charts in almost every category. I'd also like to talk to him about what tools and techniques he's using to train, because honestly, it'd be nice to give some information to people who are trying to get to that level. And certainly as somebody that is consistent as him at being excellent in the sport, he must have some tips and tricks that we can pass on to the next generation. And then lastly, I would love to talk to him about his life philosophy. People that are at the cutting edge like him, flying these epic lines, usually have an interesting life perspective that allows them to push into these, zones where a lot of people didn't come back from. And so if you've, engaged with him at all on social media as Green Flying Dude, you'll have seen that he's flying some of the most epic lines that anyone has ever done. And I'd like to know what he thinks about life in general and how he's able to reconcile all of the risk that it takes to fly those lines.
Great. I think we're all on the same page here. This is going to be an exciting episode, and I'm looking forward to chatting with Chris. Hey, Chris. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So we brought you onto the podcast for a few reasons. You're a ferocious competitor, both in the base jumping and skydiving environment, and you've been opening up some spicy exit points lately, and you're just absolutely slaying it in the terrain flying domain as well. So what we've done is we brought you on to talk a little bit about what it takes and what it means to be a good wingsuit base jumper. And I think that you have sort of the same philosophy that we do, and you're in it for the right reasons as far as like helping out the community and spreading positive information and helping others along the way. We leaned on the mentors that we have, and now we're sort of giving back. And I know that you feel really strongly about helping people. So thanks for coming on, and let's do it.
Yeah, let's jump in right away with, I'd like to know right off the bat how you came up with the measurements to understand what good is, because when I came up in wingsuit base and skydiving, wingsuit skydiving, it was pretty subjective who was good and who was not good. So first question, how did you come up with these metrics?
Well, I think on a completely base level, what makes the best base jumper is whoever's getting out of it what they want. So, if somebody's doing one jump from high nose and not even packing and smashing beers, and they get to talk to chicks and say they're a base jumper, they're better than, in my mind, than the person that is disappointed because they only got 8 jumps in the day instead of 10. So regardless of what level you get to with terrain or exits or competitions, if you're not enjoying it, I don't think that's that's for me, at least in my mind. As long as I'm enjoying it, I'll keep pushing it. That's on a base level as a foundation. But then for the actual performance metrics, then it starts with for me, it started with the skydiving wingsuit performance flying format.
No, that was a PPC competition, correct?
Yeah, and I was super lucky because when on my drop zone, I had about 100 skydives and I bought a tracking suit. And then at my drop zone, they were like, oh, okay, you got a tracking suit, go talk to this guy. And he was a base jumper, and I got introduced to the fly site GPS unit straight away. And then the next weekend, I was competing in the Australian Nationals in the tracking suit, flying the fly site. And so I was introduced to that performance flying format straight away. And what that gave me was measured progress. So I was able to have personal bests. So in that very first competition, I remember in the first round, distance, you got to fly as far as you can. And I got like, say, 700 meters over 1 kilometer of altitude. And then in the next round, it was a speed round. So I flew a bit steeper and went a bit faster. But when I looked at the data, I saw that I'd flown in that speed round, I'd flown 1.3 kilometers. And I was like, oh, actually, I'm getting better drive from that angle. In the first one, I was a bit flatter. And so it just, from the beginning, gave me that feedback. And I was able to, through trial and error, just continue to measure my progress and be able to improve.
So rather than shooting for certain numbers, what you were training towards in the beginning was just improving your metrics little by little. So without any reference point, just seeing if you could best yourself.
Exactly, because the competition's only with yourself, really. And like, I'm the youngest of 11 children, and I grew up in a big family, and so I'm naturally competitive. And so for me to be able to have like a personal best, it's measured progress. So, you know, and it's a good feeling, you know, if you fly longer than 1 kilometer for the first time, or then like, oh, you know, like 1.3 and then 2 kilometers, and it sort of encourages you and gives you direct feedback on what you're doing and how, whether that's better or worse for your results.
That's interesting. Yeah, like one of the things that I was talking with Matt about before you came on was how, progression is really like a key ingredient for all of us to get a sense of enjoyment and satisfaction out of base. And, you know, one direction can be these online competitions. And what we're talking about now is Skyderby. And I know that's something that you're very active with right now. Can you tell us a little bit, like, what is Skyderby?
Skyderby, I guess, is like the Strava of wingsuiting and tracking. So it's a platform where you can upload your GPS data and you can have a look at graphs. You can compare it to terrain profiles, and then the tracks, as you upload them, you can look at the graphs of your speed versus your glide. But then if you make the track public, it'll automatically upload it into these various online competitions. And that's great because then you can see how you do compared to other people. You can it keeps track of your personal bests, and then you can see, because a lot of the people that I see, like preparing for base, they might do a lot of 2-ways and things like that, and they might be like, oh, well, I smoked that guy, so I'm flying fast. But they might have exited the plane a little bit sooner, or it's a bit harder to react to somebody else's body movements and fly to them. Whereas if you're in a competition or an online competition and another person in a similar or the same suit to you is flying a kilometer further, you're like, oh, well, what are they doing differently compared to what I'm doing? And I think that
what does that
people,
look like from like a practical perspective? So like, you're at the exit point, you turn on your fly sight, you know, it's starting to blink, you know, you got signal, and then are you in that moment thinking, oh, okay, like I want to fit into this category, or I want to try to, like, there's different formats, right? So you want to be like, there's the feather competition, or tell us a little bit about like how, you know, which category you're looking at, and how someone can get into it, and sort of the format there specifically.
Yeah, for sure. So there's lots of different online competitions. Like you mentioned, the feather challenge, and that measures how far horizontally you can fly in the first 200 meters of altitude from the exit. And that's really useful for being able to like notice the difference from thermal lift or sinking air or tailwinds versus headwinds. And it's a really good tool to be able to analyze then getting into shorter starts what is and isn't within your skill set. But there's like distance and speed flying competitions, and there's skydiving competitions, and there's a lot of different ways that you can look at the data and be able to help that in making you a better flyer in the base environment.
Have you seen this? Have you seen this format, Matt? It's called the Feather Challenge. I mean, it's legit, like basically online competition about who starts the fastest. So like, not only are you getting the numbers exactly of like your performance, but also like how you're, competing and how you rank up against other people in different suits, different exit points, different weather situations, I would imagine. So like, you're at the top of that level. You are legit like good at starting your wingsuit.
Yeah, and that's something new for me. I have a question about that. It sounds like what you're saying is that this is a competition, but it's also just a way of us to see who might have come up with an aha moment in wingsuiting, who has maybe unlocked one of the keys. And so the question for you is, is there a lot of sharing of information at the top? Like if I go to Dennis Olson and say like, man, you set nearly a 200-mile-an-hour speed run horizontally. Like, how did you do that? Is there a lot of sharing of information about stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. In all the competitions that I've gone to within base, it's a very friendly environment for sharing information. And even if the person isn't conductive towards sharing information, the graph of their GPS or their run is public. So that's what I've been able to do, is like learn from other people's GPS tracks about, like I can see from looking at their graphs what they're doing, and then they can look at my graphs and see what I'm doing. And it's like we're pushing the sport forward together. And maybe competition isn't the right word to use, because you don't have to be competitive. A lot of people don't like competition, but what it gives you is measured progress. And like that's such a good thing to be able to progress in the sport and to be safe. So even if you're not interested in competition at all, this is such a good way of being able to, at the end of the day, be safer in the base environment, because you're understanding the range of your wingsuit or your tracking suit, and you know the envelope within which you can fly in the mountains.
It sounds like this competition is actually more of a collaboration between the top flyers, and the ranking is just to identify who might have information relevant to everybody else. Maybe you can kind of fill in the gaps here. How do people collaborate on this platform to improve their flying specifically? Like you said, we look at the track, but then what information do we glean from that specifically to improve our flying?
Well, one of the challenges is called the Kings and Queens Challenge, and that's basically wherever you finish up after 30 seconds, it's drawn in a straight line from there back to the exit and what that distance is. So it's basically how far away can you get from the exit in 30 seconds. So it's a balance between like flying glidey, which makes it the shortest distance between A and B. But if you fly steeper, you can build more energy, but you're taking a longer path to get to that point. And what it is, it's perfect because it's training for World Wingsuit League or World Base Race, where the finish line is a vertical wall that you're flying through. So if you fly steeper, you'll be able to build more energy, but if you fly glidier, you're reducing that distance in A to B. But through the tracks, and specifically with a really good friend of mine, Jaegor Orlo, what I learned from his tracks is you can start glidey, but then as you reach 1-to-1, you're tipping your angle forwards and you're extending the amount of time that it takes you to go through glide ratios depending on your suit. But for race suits, usually about from 1-to-1 through to 1.8-to-1, which is allowing you to accelerate for longer. And so that way you get the best of both worlds. You're flying that shortest distance A to B, but then you're extending that amount of time, that I call it the acceleration zone, where you're going through those glide ratios of your suit, where you're building that super terminal speed. And super terminal is one of the original, if not the first, proximity flying videos that came out from the Norwegians back in the day. And that was that term, is that a lot of people and it might be because of the feather challenge, or they like flying floaty, they hop off and they never reach the full speed potential that their wingsuit has available. And a woofo or somebody that doesn't jump, they might say, oh, what's terminal velocity? And you can say, oh, well, if you're flying at a tandem or something, you might be going about 200 kilometers an hour, or if you go head down, you might be flying about 300. But it's a balance between the amount of surface area that you present to the air and the amount of air that's there to hit you. So there sort of is no such thing as terminal velocity, because it's always a dynamic relationship. The higher that you go in altitude, the thinner the air is and the faster you can accelerate. And then based upon your inputs, especially in the wingsuit, every input you make, you're sacrificing drag for control. So the more that you can reduce the surface area that you're presenting to the air, and the more that you can adjust your body flying to be able to do smaller and smoother and more refined inputs, then you're presenting less drag and you can build that super terminal speed. And it's just from watching those videos and speaking to some of the Norwegians, it really changed my perspective, and that's really helped me to be able to build these really high speeds on base jumps.
What I'm hearing from you here is that the best strategy for the Kings and Queens challenge is to start off, get a good start, and then progressively fly faster and faster and faster. So you're accelerating throughout your entire flight. Maybe let's say we're both standing at the exit point and I want to go and do a good run. What sort of visual references would you suggest? Should I be looking at a certain angle? Should I just be thinking about how I feel the air on my body? What does that maximum speed feel like in your wingsuit? Like, are you almost falling over the handlebars? Are you how steep does the angle? Should it feel like? What are some of the things like that come off in your brain where like, oh, I'm going real fast right now?
Yeah, the really useful thing with this, and the beautiful thing about it as well, is that it depends on the exit point that you jump from. So every cliff, you've got a usable amount of terrain that you can use to build speed. So some places like at Brento, you can't fly too fast. And even they made a different challenge at Brento for a 25-second speed race, because people were chasing the Dragon on the 30-second speed races and pulling low over the landing area. And even now to do, as at Saspadoy, which is a really popular place for doing the Skyderby runs, because the gondola goes directly to the exit point, and it is the exit's at roughly 2,900 meters of altitude. So you've got a little bit of thinner air, which helps with less drag. But even there, when you're doing really good runs, like you're bottoming out on the treetops and you're using the flare to be able to have a safe canopy flight. And but for the flight during that thing, like when you're building that super terminal speed, the wingsuit you're tipping your angle steeper, so you're forcing the wingsuit down, because as you're building that speed, it's increasing your glide, and then even just the subtlest movement of flattening out, you'll go from like 1.3 to 2.5, like nothing. So that's where it's almost, the feeling is like you're trying to hide your whole body behind the leading edge, and you're trying to almost force the wingsuit to fly a little bit steeper. But what you're actually doing is stopping it with all of that speed from driving out into a flatter angle, which will slow you down.
You're fighting against the lift. That's a really good explanation that you had, by the way. You're trying to hide your body behind the leading edge. That's a really good way of putting it. Is there any other body configuration tips that you may have, as far as like, what are you doing with your shoulders? What are you doing? Are you thinking about your shoulders in your head, or is that something that just sort of comes naturally? Give us a couple more tips as far as like your body configuration and how to fly fast.
Well, I think generally within the community, people focus too much on their body articulation, because it comes secondary to following the right curve. So you could fly like with bent legs and a lot of dihedral, but if you follow a good curve, you're going to get faster speeds. And that's what I see at World Wingsuit League. I see people flying with like really aggressive anhedral arm configurations and like super duper like strong people, but their body articulation is perfect, but they're flattening out too soon, and they're not carrying that speed through those angles. So
Can
there
you
is
just
little
jump in?
things.
Sorry, a quick description for the people who may have less experience, dihedral and anhedral. Dihedral would be a more balanced position with your center of gravity lower than your wrists. And then the opposite anhedral would be your wrists and being below your center of mass or center of gravity.
Yeah, anhedral arms down and dihedral arms up a little bit. So for me personally, I just like to try and keep my arms level. But little things as well, like for example, when I used to fly, I used to be pointing my toes so hard that I would get cramps in my calves. But then when I looked at outside video of other people that were flying with me, I could see that I had a bend from my hips to my knees to my foot. And so from there, I started focusing on tensing my quads to lock my knee. And when you do tense your quad and lock your knee, you don't have to tense your calf. You can have your foot pointed with a relaxed calf. But that tensing of the quad and straightening of the leg, you can lose leverage from your core, and it's helping to suck your body off the bottom surface of the wing. And a lot of people talk about getting instability, and a word that I hear, or a phrase that I hear a lot, is people saying, oh, I can feel the air coming over the top of the wing and I get unstable. And there's always air coming over the top of the wing, but what they're actually feeling and talking about is that they're doing that, they're sucking their body off the bottom surface of the wingsuit, and they're removing a control surface that they're always used to relying on, and then they get unstable. And it's not that there's air coming over the wing and that's making them unstable. They just need to get used to flying on a smaller control surface.
I think that control surface is called the point of deflection, is it not?
I'm not too sure on the exact terminology with a lot of this stuff, because the whole thing for my progression has just been sort of trial and error. So I sort of do something in a different way, and then I see how that feels, and then I see how the results are. And then I slowly, through trial and error, see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, vocabulary or not, it's working.
And Laurent, I think you're talking about the point of stagnation is what I've heard that referred to as. And if we're flying, let's say, flat and really dirty, the point of stagnation is going to be somewhere around our chest. And that's a really flat surface that we're used to feeling relative airflow. And so a lot of people feel like they're in control there. But as we do what Chris is saying and start hiding our body behind the leading edge, that point of stagnation becomes a very small point on a convex surface. And if you're not used to focusing on that small point, and you're used to having, your chest or your midsection as this deflection point, then it can feel eerie, like there's nothing at all, like there's no relative air to push against.
Yeah, it's like you're burbling your body, and you're riding the knife edge of hiding your surface area behind your leading edge. And a lot of people get discouraged, they go like, oh, I got unstable. And I find with coaching or giving people feedback is that positive reinforcement works. And the fact of the matter is, man, you don't get speed wobbles unless you're going fast. So it's a positive thing. And then over time, you'll learn to feel the control at those angles, and you won't get the speed wobbles, but you have to push your limits to progress. And that's why it's good to do it in a safe environment within skydiving, so that then that way, when you approach base, you know your range, and you're never flying your suit at angles or doing maneuvers that you haven't done in the sky. So you're not going to be approaching a point where you're going to be losing control low over the terrain or in a base environment.
Well, we want to get into how you've trained in the skydiving world to progress your base. But before we do, I'd like to go back to something that you just said, and it is that the curve or the trajectory, if I'm understanding that correctly, that you're taking off of the exit point is more important than the body position that you take. And if you could expand on that for just a second, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because a lot of people focus on that perfect body position, and it sounded like what you just said was it's more important the trajectory that you find. You can be in an inefficient body position as long as you have a smooth trajectory, or you can have a great trajectory and still what do I want to say? You can have great body position, efficient body position with the wrong trajectory, and it can be terrible. or you can have great trajectory, and it doesn't matter what body position you have because that trajectory is most important.
Yeah, so obviously the ideal thing is to have a good trajectory and good body articulation as well, but there's no point having excellent body articulation if you flatten out too early. So it's understanding all of the pieces of the puzzle and how that all works together. And it's the same as, like, say, something like with packing. It's no point taking half an hour flaking the canopy perfectly if you're only messing up that work by putting it into the container messily. You've got to understand, like, the foundations of things that build towards performance and the order in which that goes. And body articulation is important, but it comes secondary to the trajectory.
So how are you understanding trajectory? What is the way in which you plan out a trajectory when it comes to wingsuit base?
Well, when I look at GPS data, I sort of relate, or I look at sort of where I peaked out my vertical speed and then what glide ratio I was doing at that time, or where I peaked out my horizontal speed and what glide ratio I was doing at that time. And then you start to understand the relationship, or with you and your suit, of what glide ratios you're getting your best lift at, or then getting your best acceleration, or then, like, once you go past certain glide ratios, the point which you start to slow down. And so that helps you to dial in the glide ratios where you're accelerating the most. And so for me, for a particular speed run, then that's where I want to draw out that time where I'm flying in between 1:1 and 1.8:1 to allow my suit to accelerate and my body to accelerate for longer.
And now for those reference points, I think also, is there a visual reference points as well? Because, like, you're seeing those things on the computer when you go home. When you're going back to do your next repetition, are you thinking, oh, okay, like, this was the point that I had, this speed that I want with the glide that I want. That's going to be my visual reference point, or is it something else?
Yeah, so I think like, the way that I look at it as a whole is you can go down the rabbit hole with numbers, and you can be on the computer, and even with exit points, or whether it's speed runs or exit points or whatever, you can get too deep in the numbers, but you can also go down the rabbit hole with feeling as well. And what I choose to do is use numbers to build feeling. And so that can be doing a run and then seeing where I could improve and relating that to visual reference points on a jump. So I can be like, oh, I need to be flying here or here. And then I can also use the GPS to help me to fly at the correct angles. So for a skydiving competition, I use the audible feedback from the GPS to be able to help myself to have alarms, to be able to flare and hit the gates, because it's just a invisible gate in the sky. So you're using audible feedback through headphones on the GPS to be able to time your entry into that gate perfectly. And then it's also speaking to me, and I can configure it differently for different rounds. So for example, in the distance round in the skydiving competitions, the GPS will be speaking to me in my ear, telling me my glide ratio. So it'll be like 3.2, 3.5, 3.3, 4.2. But then in the background, I can set up a secondary beeping between a certain range of speeds. So it might be like a high beep at 200 kilometers an hour. So I'm flying along and it'll be quiet. And then as I hit 200, it'll be like beep, beep, beep. And then as I progressively slow down to, say, like whatever I set the low beep at, like 150, it'll be like beep, 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 bop, bop, bop. So in the background, that's giving me like essentially a stall alarm to make sure that I don't fly too slow to then be able to start losing my lift. And on a base jump, I don't really use the audible feedback from the GPS a lot of the time, because I can find it can be a distraction. But where it's specifically for those King's Challenge speed runs, I listen to the glide ratio to help me to draw out that amount of time that I'm spending from 1.1 to 1.8 to be able to hit that perfect curve. And then I also do use the visual references from the terrain as well, once I build up familiarity with the exit point that I'm jumping from.
Okay, so to package this up, the scientific tools you're using are to start building the reference points for the base jump that you're about to do. And then the important part is to keep those visual reference points in mind as you're, flying the line as a primary focus, and the secondary focus is to match those angles with the proper body articulation to complement the angle that you're flying.
Yeah, because if it comes to, say, secondary from just speed runs, if you're just flying terrain in the base environment, it's doing those speed runs or doing that skydiving training is helping you to understand your range. So you're able to, because you're able to understand by feeling when you have speed to do a big flare, or when you have speed to be able to glide over a ridge, or you're able to understand that you're losing energy and that you don't have the speed or the glide to make it over a ridge and you need to pitch. So it's using the numbers to build the feeling to help you fly terrain safer. And with the body articulation as well, it's like that if you're going to fly with a little bit of dihedral and that helps you to be a bit more stable, then so be it. If you're flying a really steep line and you're really focused on having this perfect arms level or anhedral body position, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of stability potentially with your skill set. So it might be better for you to fly with a little bit of dihedral to be stable while you're flying that line, but then still be able to have lots of speed.
So how do you know, when you're looking at your performance, how do you know whether it's a reference point adjustment that's necessary or a body position adjustment that's necessary to improve?
I guess it's just a balance, and for everything that I've learned, it's through trial and error. And so like try something different with my trajectory or with my body position, and then I look at the results and it's better or worse. And then I just progress through that sort of trial and error method. And then I'm building, but basically it's just building the skills skydiving to be able to know the range of your wingsuit. And so whether it's like, and that's the beautiful thing about the skydiving format, is it's the 3 separate rounds. So you've got speed, distance, and time. So like minimum drag, best lift divided by drag for the distance, and then minimum fall rate, so floatiness for the time. And then so that's helping you understand your range of where you're getting the maximum speed, where you're getting the maximum glide, and where you're getting the maximum float. And so that's helping you to fully understand your whole range in a wingsuit. And that's what you're flying in the mountains. So you need to understand your full range.
So it sounds like you're going through a scientific process, basically, of narrowing down variables to try and understand which variable is most important in that part of the flight to improve performance. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, it's like, for me, I see people that are wingsuit base jumping that are learning to fly their wingsuit in the mountains. And for me, that just seems crazy, because I think if you approach it in the right way with some coaching or even some drills, or especially doing that wingsuit performance flying format, you don't have to do a lot of jumps to be able to get to know the range of your wingsuit. And then you're a lot safer when you're base jumping.
One of the things that you just mentioned was pretty interesting, is that you're using the technology to build awareness. I think that's really fascinating. One of the things in the advancements that I'm really looking forward to is the reality that we're going to have when we're at a heads-up display with pylons or rings that we're going to be able to race through, and compete against each other. And this is something that is going to really be the next step for our development as wingsuit pilots. If anything was possible, and you could have any technology you wanted, what would it be that would help you, take your wingsuiting to the next level? Would you want to have a heads-up display? Would you want to have metrics of like how much drag, is there anything that you're thinking about and wishing for right now?
Yeah, heads-up displays would be cool and interesting. Again, I think it comes back to that thing, though, of like going down the rabbit hole with numbers or going down the rabbit hole with feeling, and using the numbers to build feeling. Because if you're using a heads-up display on a base jump, potentially it could be extremely distracting as well. So whatever tools you have available, I think that you've got to use them to build your skills in the skydive environment, but then also whatever tools you're using in the base jumping environment to ensure that that's not taking away from your focus on the task at hand.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't even like jumping with a full face helmet because it takes away some of the feeling. Like I'll jump wingsuit skydiving all day with a full face, but when I'm in the mountains, I want to have all the sensory inputs that I possibly can, and having that air on my face is, that's my natural technology to build awareness. Did you have something to add, Matt?
Yeah, Chris, what would you say to the previous generation flyer who says scientific tools are the death of intuitive flying? I've heard that a lot from people from my generation, at least.
Well, that's why I'm super passionate about giving people a process or a simple way of interpreting the data, because a lot of people are intimidated by it. They're intimidated by competition, and they're intimidated by GPS graphs and stuff. But if you can give them a simple process to make it easy for them, then it allows them to get some learning from it, because regardless of the amount of data there, you've got to be able to learn from it. And the thing is, for me, is like I'm super passionate about the competition and the wingsuit skydiving performance flying format, because I feel that if people do that and understand the full range of their wingsuits, that it will prevent fatalities. Especially in 2016, when I started base jumping, there was a number of fatalities from people trying to glide over ridges when they didn't have the energy to be able to do that. And it's as simple as being able to do 10 skydives and be able to understand the range that you would have recognized within the feeling within your body that you don't have the glide and the speed to make it over that ridge.
Let's get into that.
It was a very dark year to jump into the sport. That's definitely burned into a lot of our memories about being the most dark year in wingsuit base. You had mentioned a couple of drills that people can do in the skydive environment. What are those drills?
For a start, this is the wingsuit performance skydiving format. So at the moment, it's a window in between 2,500 meters and 1,500 meters where you do speed, distance, and time rounds. And so that's teaching you to fly as far as you can. It's teaching you to spend as long in the window as possible. And then when you get to time it perfectly, you flare. So you can come into the window to start the timer. You can flare up out of the window and then kick it over and glide through the whole window. And Chris Gaylor is regularly doing over 100 seconds for the 1 kilometer of altitude within the window. And so it's like an average vertical speed underneath 40 kilometers an hour, which is just ridiculous. And then for the speeds, like you said, the people are getting average ground speeds over 300 kilometers an hour, and sometimes upper winds are obviously accelerating that, but it's amazing the level of performance that is available at the wingsuits today. And for people where they're saying that technology is the death of intuitive flying, I'd say that the exact opposite. I'd say using a bit of technology is going to increase your intuition. It's going to build your feeling. And it's going to allow you to be flying at a higher performance and ultimately be safer in the base environment.
So you mentioned these windows and these tools, and a lot of us are familiar with them, but there are a lot of us that aren't. Can you talk us through precisely what that dive flow looks like when you have that fly side on, what you're actually doing from exit to opening?
Yeah. So the thing I'm really passionate about is helping the continuation of the sport, because sometimes at drop zones, they can get frustrated by wingsuit pilots asking to get out 3 miles past the drop zone or whatever it is. But you can do a regular flight plan. So you can hop out after the last exit on the plane. You can fly, continue on jump run for a little bit, take a right turn, and then simulate the dive into the window for the exit. And so it's pretty simple to set up a flight plan and to give somebody a plan to fly, and then they can build their personal bests in those speeds, distance, and time rounds. And then when they go to try that again and they beat that personal best, it's like, hey, you flew faster or you flew further, you're improving. And then it's giving them some glide ratios and stuff that they know within which they can fly and their performance level. Aside from that, even just a dive plan of exiting and doing multiple dives and flares through a run, and then having a look at the altitude that you can gain with your flare, and then the relationship of like how much vertical energy you're building, and then how efficiently you're translating that into horizontal energy, and then how efficiently you're translating that horizontal energy into a flare. That's building really good experience and building really good feeling for being able to flare in the base environment. Because I've seen people where they're say used to flying quite fast, and then they might be trying to make a certain landing area or do a distance run, and then they try to do a flare like they have a lot of speed, and then they stall the suit, and they can find it more difficult to find the pilot chute from that configuration. But if they'd built the feeling through a bit of training, they would know that if they're already flying with slow speed on a distance run, that they're not going to have to flare as much to be able to pull. And so it's helping build that feeling just through a few simple drills.
I have been personally a bit lazy with the technology, to be honest. I've found similar progression with flying with top pilots, going out and doing some dives and flares and being next to top level wingsuit pilots and getting that visual reference of, making small adjustments within the flight to keep up or pass or whatever, but staying with a group of really with a group of really well performing wingsuit pilots can also be a drill that's really helpful for developing that intuition and that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. There's no perfect way. Like, I think for the progression as a whole, there's lots of different things involved, and there's certain things that have worked for me, but there is people that are going to be intimidated by the technology and stuff as well. But it's like utilizing the tools that you have available, and whether it's technology or flying with other people, I think like if you can sort of put it under an umbrella of going that whichever path you take, if you're working towards being a better pilot, it's ultimately going to make you more capable and more safer in the mountains. And at the end of the day, that's going to allow you to have more fun. And so that's ultimately what I want people to be able to do, is be safer and to have more fun.
I think that we could talk for hours about the details of performance flying, and I think we've already covered quite a bit. If you don't mind, I'd like to backtrack a little bit and get a little bit more information about you, because we don't know a whole lot about you. Like, what's your normal gig? What do you do when you're not flying in the mountains? Or you work in skydiving, or you a plumber? Or how does Chris pay the bills?
I'm a carpenter by trade. And then recently I've started getting into rope access work, because basically it felt like a third of the base jumpers I met did that for work. And so seemed like a good way to be able to earn some cash in a short amount of time, learn some skills on ropes that small amounts of it might be able to translate into mountaineering in the future. And then be able to work casually and have time off to be able to go on missions.
What got you into base jumping in the first place?
I saw videos on YouTube, man, and just instantly it just captured my attention so much, and I just knew that was what I wanted to do with my life, and then talked about it for years. And then eventually I sort of went for a tandem to see if I liked free fall. I loved it, but then waited another year and a half and eventually started a skydiving course, and then it just it's just slowly taken over my life from there.
So you started skydiving with the intention of base jumping?
Dude, man, I had goals written down about going to World Wingsuit League before I even started skydiving. Like, I'd seen from the Facebook posts and stuff that you needed 3 years of wingsuit base jumping experience and 300 wingsuit base jumps to be able to skydive, to be able to compete at World Wingsuit League. And I'd had like, and then I started skydiving, and I had like 50 skydives, and I made plans like, okay, if I do 10 skydives every weekend, and then I go to boogies twice a year during my time off, and then I'd write down these plans and make budgets and stuff. And I was just like, dude, it's impossible. I'll be like 60 by the time I can get there. But slowly, just one step at a time, it was just surreal. Like eventually I was like at World Wingsuit League with Yoki Summer and just living the dream.
How was that initial goal received by the people training you how to skydive? You know, you show up to AFF level 1 with a goal of being a competitive wingsuit base jumper. I imagine you might have gotten some cross-eyed looks.
Yeah, dude, I think that there's people in the community that obviously for, it's a dangerous sport or for whatever reasons, or just that they might be burnt out in their profession as an AF instructor or a tandem instructor or whatever, that they're going to give people some negative feedback for wanting that. But I feel the exact opposite. I feel that if you care about like the sport, like even if it's just skydiving, if somebody comes to the drop zone and they want to be a wingsuit base jumper, first they've got to be able to come like a really competent, excellent skydiver. So encourage that. And encourage them to be able to learn about base jumping in a methodical way, because if you learn about jump run and flat flying and canopy skills and all these things, it's all adding up to helping you to be a better base jumper at the end of the day. So I'd like to be the change that I want to see in the community and encourage people when they come to the drop zone as fresh jumpers and say they want a wingsuit base jump. I say that is awesome, but let's follow the right progression to help that make it become a reality in a safe way.
What does that progression look like in a brief outline?
Well, I think that's where things have changed from the old school to the new school. So that's where I think that there's lots of things that you can do within skydiving that are going to add up to helping you to be a better base jumper. And one of the things is once you do get to wingsuiting, is to do that wingsuit performance flying skydiving format to learn the full range of your wingsuit. And it doesn't take too many jumps, because you can be like you can know the full range of your wingsuit, and then that way, like, you start base jumping and you can progress through base jumping and do slider down jumps and build the other necessary things that are involved, like packing and getting used to different feelings and visuals and decision making. But then by that time, once you've done some terminal jumps and you've done some tracking and you're ready to progress to wingsuiting, that it is so much easier if you know exactly how to fly your wingsuit in the sky and you know the full range. To be able to do all of that base preparation and then put on a wingsuit and not be able to fly at 100%, it just seems crazy to me. So doing the work in the sky first and knowing how to fly your wingsuit, it's just one less thing on your mind.
Well, speaking of crazy, I'd like to jump back to you and ask, well, you've accomplished the goal that you set out initially. What continues to motivate you to be on the sharp end of the sport?
I just absolutely love it. For me, it makes me a better person. Like having the time off through the coronavirus and spending more time in Australia doing skydiving, and then being able to come back to the mountains, it's like, it sets my soul on fire. And I just love to fly, and I love to progress and see what I'm capable of. And it's just amazing.
Are you scared of dying?
No, but I think that like talking about death is extremely positive. For me, embracing my own mortality has been the single most positive thing I've ever done in my life, because it makes me live. For people that are afraid of dying, like if you're super, super scared of dying in a logical way, you should be completely stoked on being alive, because you're alive right now. And so knowing that you're going to die one day makes you live the life that you want. You go to your boss and you say, hey, stuff you, I quit. Or, you go and ask that pretty girl out on a date, or you chase your goals because you're alive and you only get the one opportunity to enjoy the power and beauty of your youth. So, and it makes you have difficult conversations, like even within my family, getting into base jumping and like writing a letter to them if I die. It's initiated some difficult conversations, but they've been really positive in the long term. Because a lot of people wait till they're on their deathbed to be able to tell their family that they love them. Tell your family and friends that you love them right now. Live the life that you want to live. It's, I think that's like a really positive thing that's come from me base jumping is understanding that, you know, I could die tomorrow, and that's why I'm going to live the life that I want to live today.
I know that you say in your countdown to exit, 3, 2, 1, dream. Tell us a little bit about that.
For me, this is the dream. And within humanity, I think that there's an importance placed on last words. There's a famous outlaw in Australia from back in the day, Ned Kelly. And before he was hung, he was an outlaw, and he said, "Such is life." And, you know, people get it tattooed on them and things like that. But for me, every time when I jump, I don't know essentially whether I'm going to live or whether I'm going to die. So what I say before I exit is potentially my last words. And if I was to be able to choose a one-word message to humanity or to my friends or family, it would be dream. Let your imagination run wild. Anything you want, you can have it if you approach it in a measured way.
That's interesting to hear somebody as calculated as you say that you don't know whether you're going to live or die on the jump. You know, as compared to another guest of ours, Rich Webb, who would almost say that you know, with pretty certain like terminology that he was going to survive on the jumps because he's calculated so much. So what leads you to say that, and what is the probability in your head there?
I don't mean it in a reckless way that like, oh yeah, it's a coin toss and I don't know whether I'm going to live or whether I'm going to die. But I think it's an easy way for complacency to creep in, or to a certain way that you're in denial if you're going to say 100% I'm going to survive this jump, because the sport kills people that are beginners and it kills people that are experts. And I think you've got to, no jump is worth dying for, but you've got to be able to be prepared that it could happen on any jump. And so for me, that helps me to be safer and to be better prepared with having my affairs in order and things like that. And it also helps me to choose the people that I jump with better as well, because I've seen people die, I've inspected people's bodies, and I've written incident reports, and I've had people that have died that have been quite close friends, but I didn't have their emergency contacts. So essentially I had to be a private investigator to work out who their parents were and be the first person to tell them that their son had died. So if you take a little bit more sort of responsibility and understanding that this is a dangerous sport and that you could die, it helps you to put things in place to make sure that you're being responsible. Because to not have your affairs in order and to not have these difficult conversations with your family, or to not have your friends have your emergency contact information, it makes like what can sometimes be described as a selfish sport a lot more selfish and reckless. Because if you do die, you're leaving a burden for those left behind. So
Well said. Well said,
I only do things that are within my experience level. I really try to find that balance between knowing what is and isn't within my experience level. And as you guys put it, when you get on the sharp end, it can be very difficult because you're venturing into territory that not many people have ventured into before, or for opening new exit points that nobody's ventured into before.
Now, there's something I want to dig into a little bit. I'd like to know how you're building margin, especially on jumps where you're on-sighting the line. And I've seen a couple of lines that you've flown through, some amazing social media. By the way, I follow the crap out of you, man. It's so awesome watching the lines that you're putting down. And I've recently become aware that some of those lines were on-sights. And I'm curious how you are building the margin into an on-site line. And just for anyone that's curious of that terminology, I'm saying flying a line for the first time without previous practice or information.
So below tree line, on the ground, ripping a sweet terrain line for the first time on site.
Well, To a certain extent, like I am assessing as much information that I have available to me. So one thing that I've been doing here in Switzerland is I'm looking at topographical maps, and there's a map here where you can look at power lines. So you can look at and see if there's any power lines that are labeled on the map that are going to be within the lines that you fly. And so it certainly gives you, and you can laser the exit, so it gives you a lot of information. Even if you haven't flown it before, you have a lot of information that's available. But I know my range and I know the feeling of where I can fly in my wingsuit. And even if it's on the first time of a line, I can be aggressive. And it's a hard balance to fly, but sometimes like I see a lot of people where they try to be safe. And a lot of people I feel have gone in trying to be safe in a way that they feel other people will see them. And to fly closer to the terrain isn't necessarily always more dangerous because you're flying with more energy. If you're like at the beginning and you're flying like 100 meters off the deck, if you stall your wingsuit, it doesn't really matter whether you're 10 meters off the deck or 100. You might not be able to get your pilot chute out in time. So me being comfortable with knowing exactly what the range is with my wingsuit and then utilizing information that's available to me, whether it be topographical maps or cable maps or weather conditions and the apps that are available for weather now, and using a laser on the exit, and then assessing the terrain that I'm available to fly, then yeah, I do feel comfortable to be able to fly the terrain on my first flight. But then I can build reference points and build better visual awareness of the jump over time and get more aggressive on future flights. But sometimes you go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I've done that especially on that Dreamlines jump. It's such a technical place to fly because of the start, because of the glide that's required to get over the line, how long the line is, and because of the similarness of the grass slopes and the houses, it's easy to get lost in the terrain, and then there's cables everywhere at the end of the line. So it's like I've done 5 jumps off the cliff there, and I've done 2 jumps out of the chopper there now as well. But like I've flown a line there to the right where I'm then flaring over terrain and then getting into it, like flaring over power lines, getting into a trench that has power lines as well. And to a certain extent, then you feel like it's chasing the dragon, and when is enough enough? And that's when I'm really grateful to be able to have the speed runs and the performance flights or the distance flights or filming other people. I've got multiple outlets where I can still challenge myself, but in safer ways. And in any of those outlets, whether it's terrain flying or filming or performance runs, I can feel myself when I get to a stage where I'm chasing the dragon. And then I'm lucky to have those different outlets to mix it up, to be able to give myself some variety to, I feel, be safer.
So it sounds like rather than the margin on some of these jumps being built in the numbers, you're building the margin in how at home you feel in a wingsuit and how at home you feel in that particular mountain range. Am I like characterizing that properly?
Yeah, I think it's like I'm not going to go too crazy on the terrain if I don't know if there's cables there or if I haven't seen any video of it before. But I think people can overcomplicate the process as well, and they can get obsessed with setting checkpoints. And like setting checkpoints can be good, but then it's killed people as well because they've flown over a ridge at Brevant into a certain line in the morning, and then they want to do that again in the afternoon, and then they've died trying to fly over that ridge. And so if they were trusting their feelings better rather than building a methodical process and trusting their checkpoints, then it maybe would have kept them alive.
Target fixation is real. And I've unfortunately been on a fatality load where that was the reason that they wanted to hit a target or hit their checkpoint, and the conditions just weren't allowing it at that point. And yeah, they lost the awareness of the air and the sort of energy that they had, and were focused on the task instead. I think it's also worth mentioning that you hike some of the lines that you fly too. Like that's another level of homework, you know, like actually hiking the flight and for obstacles. And I mean, you know, watching the video can be real deceiving as far as like how steep it is, obstacles that are there, all sorts of things. Is yeah. So I think that's Chris does his homework.
Yeah, but at the same time as well, you can do too much homework as well. And I think it was Matt Gerdes who says, you know, like terrain flying is quite easy. All you really need is spatial awareness and an understanding of flying your wingsuit. But you can make it, it's complex stuff, and there's a lot of different factors that go into it, and you want to be able to take into account the information that's easily available to you. But the most important thing is to know your limits and know what is and isn't within your experience level. And another thing that I try to do is recognize problem patterns of behavior before they result in an incident, and to be honest with myself and pull myself up on occasion if I start to see that I'm, you know, if I'm getting away with jumps or getting away with certain things or behaviors, not to just go, yeah, that's okay and it was all good, but to kind of go, hey, do I have some room for improvement here, or should I take a little bit of a step back?
That's interesting. I have my own metric for the way the approach is going. It's something that I learned from Steph Davis, and it's like three strikes you're out, or three flags, warning flags, and I've used that quite often. Like you know, it could be something as simple as stumbling on the hike, or dropping my gear, or feeling ill. You know, anytime there's three factors that show up on the approach or in the car, whatever, on that day, I don't care what it is, I'm walking down. And that's just sort of the boundaries that I've set for myself. I think that what you're talking about too is this personal awareness of how you're feeling, and how in your perfect personal performance for that day can be something extremely difficult too. I mean, this is hard stuff to understand. Are there things that you look for in your own mind or in your own body to take account for how well you were performing that day?
Yeah, and like some of the things that you said about those three strikes and things, like it's actually one of the things I most enjoy about base jumping is you know, on the hike, I might have thoughts going through my head of like, you know, if I die, what's my mum going to think? Or what's this person going to say? Or, oh, what's the wind doing? And all this sort of thing. And you have that, that monkey brain or that fear and worry in your head. And it's like, I love that sort of self-actualization, or being able to move past that and go, no, like, I've done the research, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling safe, and I'm going to send it. And it's a beautiful thing to step outside your comfort zone and overcome those things, and to, even if you are scared, be able to know what is and isn't within your experience level to be able to fly. And it's a beautiful
Do you always push through those boundaries, or are there times where you're like, I'm going to just take it easy on this one?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So one of the things that I've realized recently, or like that I've learned more about recently, getting into some higher altitude jumps, is then doing high altitude jumps and then trying to do speed runs. And so the fatigue on the hike, it's hard to do a long hike and then to be able to calm down and stretch, and then be able to be in a full frame of mind to be able to send it on a jump. It's really hard. And then I'll recognize that on jumps, and I've walked down from jumps before where I felt that if I was going to exit, that all my legs are going to cramp, or that I'm so exhausted that I'm not going to be able to be safe when I'm going to fly. And that's a hard decision to make, especially when you're looking at a 4-hour hike down and you're already exhausted, and you know that if you jump off, you can be down in 2 minutes. But you've got to recognize, like, you know, am I tired? And you've got to build that into how you fly. So it's
Yeah, absolutely. I've recently had an 8-hour approach to almost 4,000 meters, and was forced to gear up on like a half a meter by half a meter space. Very stressful gear up spot to be, to say the least. And yeah, I mean, I had these ideas about this rip and line that I wanted to fly, and a big part of that day was just flying with the tools that I had at the moment. And I felt good, but there was definitely some adjustment of expectations based on how the day had unfolded.
Yeah, I think that's it comes back to something we spoke at the very beginning about what makes the best base jumper. And it's regardless of the line that you fly, it's amazing to just descend from a mountain in a wingsuit. And so knowing thyself and knowing how you're feeling at the time, it's super nice to just do a cruisy flight and a high parachute opening and enjoy the parachute ride sometimes. And you got to recognize sometimes, yeah, like when it's good to be aggressive or when it's good to fly cruisy.
So, and that's a tough thing for a lot of jumpers to do. Going back to your life philosophy of, we're here now. Let's live as much as we can. There are certainly a lot of jumpers that take that to the next step and sacrifice, their tomorrow for the today's flight. And so I'm wondering, like, what do you say to that person who is trying to find the balance between maximizing their life now and maintaining some kind of view of the future so that they curtail their now jumping to include possibly jumping in the future?
One thing that really helps me is I imagine having a conversation with some of my friends that have died. And say I had a couple of really good friends die in 2019. If I was able to just sit down for 10 minutes and have a conversation with them right now, I'd be like, hey man, how's it going? And they'd be like, oh dude, man, I'm so sorry I died, man. I stuffed up and I went in. And I'm like, yeah, dude, man, you should be really sorry, man. I had to like look at your body with your mum, like she was really upset. And oh, dude, I'm so sorry. And I'd be like, anyway, man, let me tell you about what's happened since you've been gone, like, oh, dude, I went to China and I won this comp and oh, I met a pretty girl and oh, I did this awesome trip to New Zealand and then oh, dude, you wouldn't believe it. Like this virus took over the whole world and we weren't able to travel for ages. And then like this happened and that happened. And it'd be like, wow, man. I'm like, yeah, dude, like so much has happened and it's only been 2 years since you've been gone. You missed out on so much. And, that's the thing that sort of, I want to send it and I want to do amazing things, but I don't want to miss out on the future as well. And it's that balance to find. And it's to think about what you're leaving behind as well. Like no jump's worth dying for. And at the end of the day, nobody really cares whether you're ripping a sick line or whether you're just flopping off the mountain and having a super cruisy flight and pulling at 1,000 meters, like it's be around for a good time and a long time.
On that note, I'd also like to ask, undoubtedly there are some people that are just like you watching social media and looking at your videos going, that's where I want to be. What advice do you have the people that are chasing the green flying dude?
Man, do it. Like flying is amazing. It'll help you to be a better person. And whatever it is in life, like whether it's playing chess or raising a family or asking for a raise from your boss, like life is special and go for it. Live the storybook life that you want because, it starts now and life is beautiful. And if you want to end up like flying wingsuits in a technical way, then follow the pathway that's there. And I feel lucky that I was, that I only started base jumping in 2016 because I was able to learn on modern equipment and learn with modern techniques. And even now it's progressed so much further since I started, and there's so many tools available to help you to be able to progress in a awesome way and to be able to take advantage of all the latest tools that are available.
We've been talking a lot about the mental aspect of wingsuit base, and these are all incredible nuggets. There's one technical thing that I want to loop back to, and that's the use of laser rangefinders, because I know that you're well informed and diligent about your use of lasers. Can you talk a little bit about you've opened something that you deemed after Yoki's video and his helicopter line? You did quite a bit of laser rangefind work with that exit point, and I think you've also found another one that's even more friendly recently after that. Can you walk us through a little bit about what you do for opening an exit point, what you do with those numbers, and the consideration that goes into that sort of process?
Yeah, well, I still have a lot to learn with lasering, but I do use it as a tool to help me assess new exit points. But I take the numbers with a massive grain of salt, and I know from doing a lot of camera flying, base jumping, I know what I can jump over in regards to ledges in the first 50 meters. And I don't really like tossing rocks off exit points a lot of the time, but for certain jumps, if there's no one below and that sort of thing, you can use a few small rocks to help you to see how far your launch is going to get you. But then using the laser as well to be able to determine the terrain further down the mountain really helps you as well. But for example, the laser that I have, it has Bluetooth, so it can connect to my phone, and I can build a terrain profile in a minute, and then I have GPS tracks saved on my phone of me flying my wingsuit. I can compare it to those GPS tracks and then give myself an idea of whether the jump is possible or not. And I did that in Saudi Arabia in 2019 as well. So I was able to, in 5 minutes, do the homework with the laser to be able to compare that to the GPS all on my phone to be able to say, yeah, this is within my experience level. But
now, sorry, with the line that you're using to judge whether or not it's doable or not, is that an average from your worst start to your best start, or are you using your best start, or where does that line come from for you?
Yeah, so I have a few different GPS tracks saved on my phone. So some high altitude ones, because with the thinner air, you're going to start a little bit slower in the wingsuit. One that I really like to compare it to is like a speed run. So where I'm carrying more energy through the start arc, because then if I go like, even on a speed run, I'd still be on the deck of the terrain. I know that I've got a lot more range than that. Then for me, that gives me the comfort level to kind of go that there's a lot of margin in the jump. But I'm not just looking at the numbers and going like, oh yeah, well the numbers say it's okay. I'm relating that to my experience level and my visuals and other work that I can do, say on like Google Earth or other topographical map apps or websites to be able to calculate the glide to the landing area that's outside of my laser range and that sort of thing. So I use the laser as a tool, but I don't use it blindly and ignore the visual that I see as well.
So it's visual for you. That's interesting. I think we all have our little things that we fall back on. It's what's more comfortable. You talked about camera flying and what you can jump over. I don't see the connection there. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah, so with camera flying, generally the person that I'm filming will take I want them to be as relaxed and as comfortable as possible, that I don't want them to have to worry about me at all in their flight because if they have thoughts in their mind that I have to exit this way or I have to fly this way, it's taking away from them being safe. So I want them to be able to essentially run a solo, and I'll tell them if I'm going to backfly in certain sections or things like that. But for the actual exit, I'm usually exiting from the secondary position. So they're taking the best point where it's good for them to launch from. And so camera flying's been rad because it's taught me to exit off a lot of different stuff, whether it's like flat rocks or pointy rocks or grass or different things. And then also then to be able to exit from things like further back, or that I might have to jump over some subterminal ledges or trees or things like that. And because it can really help me, especially on exits that are in like a bowl or a V, if I get their exact launch landmark of where they're going to launch, And then if I know that they're going to turn left, like sometimes I can exit over the top of them and say like exit from the right, but then end up subterminal on the left to be able to cut the corner. And so it's really taught me a lot about being able to exit off a lot of different foot marks, but then also to be able to really look at the terrain subterminal below the exit point and look at different ledges, or look at the, if it's in a bit of a bowl or if it's in a bit of a V, to be able to go like, how much can I cut the corner on the exit? And then those visuals have allowed me to really get a good idea of what I can and what I can't jump over, and then exactly like how I'm moving in my start arc.
Cool.
Moving on to some other equipment, I'm curious, what equipment are you flying and why did you make those decisions?
So at the moment I'm with Squirrel for wingsuits and parachutes and containers. And like I've flown for Tony Suits and Phoenix Fly in the past. And like I've won competitions, like I've won World Base Race and I've won World Wingsuit League in those different suits. So I have a real world practice and understanding of testing and flying race suits and winning competitions. And like I really enjoy to fly the Squirrel equipment because it gives me better results, and then most of all just because I feel it's good vibes, and with the team and the everything like that, and it gives me the right tools that I need to jump safely in the mountains.
Do you have a go-to suit and a go-to container or parachute that you liken? And if so, I'm curious because I mean everybody's flying like the whole range of every manufacturer, and so I'm curious, like, what tool are you stoked on at the moment?
Man, if I was only going to be able to fly one wingsuit for everything, it'd be the CR Plus. Like I just love having the most amount of performance available, and it's stable at all angles, and I can backfly it. It doesn't have backflying inlets, but if you have decent body articulation, it'll backfly fine as well, and you can do short starts in it. But I just like having that ultimate power, like in the flare and in the glide and in the speed. And it's just like, why would you drive a Ford Focus when you can drive a Lamborghini,
Man, you've inspired me to order a CR Plus for sure. Like I was in love with the 2016 Red Bull Aces C race. That suit is still like one of my favorites. Yeah, seeing what you're doing and how much power and the flare you've got with that CR Plus. Is it a CR Plus base friendly version, or is it your full competition suit?
So I've got with me on this trip, I've got 2 CR Pluses and a C race. One's a skydiving CR Plus, and I've just been using that for performance records. And then I have a base friendly CR Plus that still is a weapon in regards to performance, but slightly bigger inlets, mega storage, and it's just a lot more comfortable for base. And then a base C race as well. And I really like that for filming. Like today I filmed a 2-piece tracking suit, and you can fly with anybody in it, and it backflies. But it sort of comes down to right tools for the job. So even aside from brands, like what I tell people is like, find the balance between performance and ease of use. And what I mean by that is like, say, a C race or a racing suit from a different manufacturer, it might be like, say, 100 potential performance points. But if you don't, because it's going to be maybe a little bit more of a handful to fly compared to another suit, if you're only getting 80% out of that 100 potential performance points, maybe you'd be better off on a suit that's might only say have like 90 potential performance points, but because it has a better ease of use, getting 95% out of 90 is better than getting 80% out of 100. So find that balance between ease of use and performance and get the right tools for the job.
Yeah, I mean, the things that you're talking about carry over to any manufacturer, as far as comfort go. Can you expand a little bit on what comfort means exactly? Because I think it means different things for different people. Like for me, the how tight it is in the sleeve can be a real indicator of how much available performance that I might have out of my race suit. But I like it a little bit looser in the wrist, especially, and then the amount of internal pressure that is maintained within the suit can also be a comfort level. But is there any details that you want to share with us about comfort and like what you're looking for in comfort in a base suit?
I think generally for people, like one thing is just the level of surface area, and the for me with I noticed the difference now because I hadn't jumped the sea race a lot before this summer. I'd only done it for World Wingsuit League in 2019, but then I've done a lot more jumps on it this summer, and the difference between the C race and the CR Plus is very similar. The CR Plus has a bit of extra surface area, but it's just a little bit of extra surface area to deal with if you're doing really aggressive turns or steep lines and stuff like that. And it's still comfortable at all those angles, but just for me, it's just a little bit extra to deal with. So I have to be a little bit more precise with my body articulation. Whereas with the C race, having that little bit of extra surface area just makes it a little bit easier for me to be super nimble and agile. And that's why for other people, like, they might get better performance out of a freak compared to a C race because it's easier for them to access that performance.
Right.
I'd like to.
Did you want to jump in that with something?
Yeah,
on
I'd
that?
like to jump back in time to 2016, 17. A lot of people were flying or starting to fly the performance skydiving suits in the base environment. And there was a big debate going on about which was, quote unquote, safer or least dangerous, because we were trying to find a balance between getting increased performance, which was arguably safer on the flight, and being able to manage the mistakes that one would make just as a human being, slipping on exit, mistiming the flare so that your pull is difficult. Where do you find the balance between increasing the performance and still leaving margin for error in those realms that the race suits make a little more dangerous?
Well, for me personally, I don't think that the race suits make anything more dangerous for me. I jump the race foam in the arms for every single jump that I fly. Almost the only times like I've ever taken the foam out is when I'm jumping with 2 jackets and I have a lot of extra gear stored with me for high alpine jumps. But the suits are comfortable at all angles, and the most important thing though is, I guess, that's what I am most comfortable flying, because I do a lot of skydiving competitions and I'm flying the race suits a lot. So for me in the base environment, it makes sense for me to fly the suit that I'm most comfortable with. And there's been really good progression with the suit technology, even on the race suits, to make them more comfortable as time has gone by as well. And I've never had a drama with deploying or things like that, but it's going to be different for different people. And that's why it comes down to the right tools for the job.
Yeah, I know. I just want to jump in with my own personal experience. Like, I feel really comfortable with the race foam as well. But there are a couple of moments, and I've definitely had some oh fuck moments in deployment with some line twist issues. And, it's limited my ability to reach higher on the risers on after deployment, controlling body twists. And that, I think, is maybe some of the reasons why, like, I don't always use the race foam. I'm also, a new dad too, so my level of currency is a little bit lower, obviously, than Chris's right now, and I think that that's like one of the factors that I sort of modulate on my level of currency.
Well, moving forward, I'd love to know where the next goal is for you, Chris. Where are you shooting for? Do you have any projects or any records that you're going after currently?
Yeah, so I'm having heaps of fun in Switzerland at the moment, and even just on the drive home from the valley today, I'm just every time I'm here, my jaw is on the floor, just looking out the window at cliffs and going, oh, I wonder if that's possible. Oh, I can catch the train up to Shinega Plateau and then I can hike across and laser that. And like, oh, look at those lines and lines and lines. And so it's like, it just feels super fun to be surrounded by an environment that just inspires me so much. And there's so much to explore, to go out and find new jumps. So I'd love to do the time to do that. But at the same time, I'm really excited with doing jumps from the Eiger at the moment to do these performance records, because it's such an amazing mountain. It has so much history with climbing and it's just so aesthetically beautiful, but it's like one of the best places in the world for doing performance runs, because it's big and steep and it has high altitude, so it gives you thinner air to be able to accelerate. So I've really been chasing the dragon there recently, trying for these King's Challenge records. So a couple of days ago, I got to 1606 meters in the 30 seconds, and I was super stoked because it was the first time anybody's gone over 1,600 meters. And I had the world record in 2017, 18, and 19, and then later in 2019. And through that whole process, me and my friend Jaeger were just constantly swapping and breaking each other's records, and a lot of other people involved in that process as well. And to give you an indication, like back in 2017, the King's Challenge record was 1,436 meters. And even to this day in wingsuits, there's only been, I think around 8 people or 10 or 11 people in history that have flown further than 1,400 meters in a wingsuit in the 30 seconds. But from 1437 in 2017, in 2018, then it finished at 1548. So it just was like a big jump through that year. And then in 2019, I got to 1552, and then Jaeger finished on 1597. But all the way back in 2017, I had the dream of going like, well, I wonder if a mile would be possible in the 30 seconds, which would be like 1609 and a half meters, and then I was like, oh, well, maybe if the wingsuit technology gets better through the years, that would be possible. And then I've been like thinking that it would be way off in the future, but then for this year to be able to break that 1,600 meter barrier, but it was so close, man, like 1606, and I was like, oh man, the drag of the GoPro, like it would have been the mile. But that keeps me hungry, man, and the other thing, so I'm shooting for that mile in the 30 seconds. The other one is to break the 100 meter barrier for a base flare. So earlier this year in Saspodoy, I broke 90 meters for the first time of anybody on base jumps. So I did like a 91 meter flare, and then the next day like a 94.6 meter flare. And I'm really excited to build that super terminal speed and really give it a crack to try and crack the 100 meter flare in the base environment. And then just to build the total speed. I got 333 k's an hour off the high Eiger a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really excited to try and beat that as well. Because it's just like for me, it's super fun for me. A lot of people don't get it, but for me, like if you meet a little kid, the first thing they're going to ask you when they see a wingsuit is like, how fast does it go? And even for me now, even with the world record on it, it's like, well, I don't know how fast it can go, because I know that it can be flown faster. And that's the sick thing about like climbing up a mountain, is like some people want to like do these distance runs and all this sort of stuff. And for me, it's like, sometimes it's like you've got this beautiful, massive cliff face giving you this void, this empty space that is a playground to go like, well, you've got that amount of terrain to be able to build that speed. So like, how much speed can you build? And so it just keeps me super hungry, man.
That's funny, right? Like you'll meet somebody who's never seen a wingsuit before, and the first thing that they'll ask, and this isn't the kid, it's the adult, is how long does it last? I guess it depends. If you're Chris, it lasts not very long.
Oh, I'm pretty good, man. Like the wingsuits, they're pretty durable, man. And I take care of my gear, Like that's one thing. Like I'm a trash packer. I always put
No, I'm sorry. What I mean is, how long does the jump last? How long can you fly? And like,
yeah. Oh, my apologies.
You're hiking up to the ecstasy board and, pulling your parachute in what, 30 seconds or something?
Yeah, well, it depends how steep you fly, yeah. But that's what I meant. This is one thing that I love, right? And so, like, as far as I understand it, I'm the fastest self-powered human being in history because I walk up the mountain and then I jump off it. So there's plenty of people that have flown faster than me. Like, for example, speed skydivers, like there's the world championships going on at the moment in Russia, and like a really good friend of mine and an American guy, Kyle Laprise, like last time I checked, he was in first place and he was regularly getting over 500 k's an hour in the speed skydiving. But then they call it though, like when they advertise it, they're like, yeah, it's the fastest non-motorized sport on earth. And it's like, well, if it's non-motorized, do it without a plane. Right. You got to respect what's giving you that energy. Because I reckon the fastest people in history compared to the Earth would have been astronauts, because they've orbited the moon, and compared to the Earth, they would have been going the fastest. And then you got like Felix Baumgartner. He went up in a hot air balloon and jumped out from the stratosphere with a spacesuit on and break the sound barrier in freefall. But it was, for those people, it's like the rocket or the plane or the hot air balloon that's given them that energy. But when you hike from the landing area, like the actual physical process that's going on, you're converting chemical energy from your legs to potential energy within your body that you're then releasing as kinetic energy when you fly. And so every step of that hike, if it's a 5-hour approach, it's like squeezing a big steel spring, like, and then even that 5 hours, you're winding up all of that energy. And then in that jump, you're just releasing it. And every second that you fly is like 200 steps of energy bursting out of your chest. And it's a connection to the planet, man, because you're hiking up that mountain, you're winding up all of that potential energy, and then you're using the void that mountain presents to be able to see how much energy you can release into flight. And I just find that beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, the full circle. It's like a sense of liberation, like very few other people get to experience. It's something super special. In the paragliding world, there's this hike and fly races are getting really popular, especially here in the Alps, where there'll be a start line and then you hike and you just, whatever it takes, you have to make it back to another point. And oftentimes, like, the fastest way is to fly, but sometimes it's just running or whatever. And I'm personally really into the fitness aspect of climbing and hiking and flying. It would be interesting to see some sort of Skyderby format to incorporate the approach as well. That's maybe something that can evolve in the near future. That's something that I'd like to see.
Dude, that's a really cool idea. And the cool thing about Skyderby is it's run by Alexander Kunin. He's a fellow jumper, and he gives what the people want. So if you have a cool idea, he can make it happen.
Cool. That we're starting to run out of time here, and maybe we can edit this out at 1:31. Matt, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about, or is there any way you would like to wrap this up? And if not, Chris, is there anything that you would like to mention before we wrap this up?
It's been a really cool chat with you guys, and I'm sure we can talk a lot longer. Like even outside of the podcast, be nice to talk to you and keep this friendship going. But
right on, man. One of our goals with this podcast is really to give back to the community and to tighten up this circle a little bit and circle the wagons in a way and share vetted information so that there's a little less myth and mystique around what it means to be good, what it means to be proficient and safe and have best practices be common knowledge. And really thank you for joining us and contributing to this conversation. And you'll always be welcome to come back and share anything with us, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about this subject.
Yeah, for sure. And just in case, if anybody that's listening, feel free to hit me up on social media anytime. Like, I'm happy to provide coaching for people, even if it's remotely. If you've got questions to ask about exits or Skyderby or GPS information, like, or for even if you're not even a jumper, for the progression that's involved to get in a wingsuit base, feel free to message me. I'm super passionate about it, and I love to help the community as much as I can.
Awesome. All of your social information will be included in the show notes so they can just find you there. And I know from personal experience, the online coaching is very valuable, and Chris has a ton of information to give you. And I know personally, even as an advanced wingsuit pilot, I've learned a lot from you this conversation. And thanks a lot, buddy.
Yeah, and I just want to add my thanks as well. You know, a high tide raises all boats, and undoubtedly you are raising the tide for all of us. So thanks for pushing it out there, and all the best and nothing less.
Sweet as. Send it till you end it.
Cheers. Wow, so Chris is what a good guy, right? I mean, like super talented, humble, and interesting like dichotomy of like super regimented in his training and his analytical side to base jumping, but then also goes full send. Like it's an interesting tightrope to walk, and I feel like I learned a lot about the mentality there, and something that I'm even like going to apply to my own mentality in a way of looking at things, and that was super interesting. I know you picked up on it.
Yeah, I really think that he's kind of redefining the Australian culture there. Traditionally it's been very sendy, and I think he's exemplifying a new mentality that is earn sendy. If you got to put the work in to be sendy, and if you want to be at the cutting edge, doing this radical stuff, then you also have to put in an incredible amount of work, crunching numbers and training and being at home in the wingsuit and being at home in the mountains. And that will allow you ultimately to be even more sendy than the people that are just hucking it.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I think was a really good takeaway here was like, and something that I've learned in tunnel flying too, is like, the most performant wing isn't always like the most rigid, like perfect configuration. It's the one that you're comfortable in and able to access the right angle and line, and that's something that I think really hit home for me.
Yeah. Speaking to him, did you have any surprises come up? Anything that you were expecting that went differently when he started answering those questions?
One of the things that kind of surprised me, and I don't, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, is that he seems to have covered all his bases already. Like there was no question that sort of like put him off balance, or something that he hasn't already examined inside first. Some people can be a little uncomfortable when you ask them if they're scared of dying, and he's fully examined that. And I think he's fully examined all the ins and outs, and spent time understanding how he feels personally about it. And I think that's a really good place to be. This is a full commitment activity, and you shouldn't leave those dark, unhidden spots unturned. And he's clearly done his homework on his, spiritual and mental side as well, which is something super interesting.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Prepared to the hilt, I guess, is like the characterization I would use. And if you're prepared like he is from beginning to end, literally, from the beginning of, the equipment that he's using and how he's using it to the end of potentially going in on the jump that he's making, you really have the space to step on the gas, and put all of your energy down, put all of your knowledge down, into that one flight, and if you don't have that preparedness, I just don't think you'll ever be able to even create the space to perform like he does.
Yeah, absolutely. And that self-regulation piece too was it was interesting, you know, because I think a lot of us can have a distorted perspective on our activity because a lot of our, you know, besides our regular jumping buddies, you know, what we see is online and it's always the rad epic shit, you know, and even people like Chris Byrnes sometimes, you know, will ease off the gas and have a nice cruisy flight just to escape the mountain sometimes, depending on how he feels. And I don't know, maybe that's just something that I'm using to confirm my own thoughts about, you know, like I like to get radical, but sometimes I like to, you know, just hike up a hill and have a smooth flight away.
Yeah, and on that note, it seems like he's really also bringing to the sport the, go slow to go fast mentality. He doesn't just get a suit and jump it right off of a cliff. He wants to literally experience every single piece of the flight envelope before he takes it off. And like you said, hiking up the line that he's going to fly. I mean, there's no slower way to go than that. But once he's experienced every single rock on that line, through the pads of his foot, then, he really is able to put down every ounce of speed into that line because he knows it.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own personal thoughts as far as on-sighting lines. What did you think? Do you, I mean, I don't want to judge his approach. That's his journey. It's not something that's necessarily the right approach for me. I mean, sometimes, like it's not something that I would recommend to my close friends. But he seems to be at ease with that approach, and I think that if someone is going to take that approach, he's doing it in the right manner.
Yeah, it's tough for me to say, because I came from sports like, for instance, ski and snowboard, where you never did that. It was pre-ride, re-ride, free ride, where even if you had been down the mountain in that exact section before, you still took the easier line first to pre-ride it, and then you re-rode it, and then you would free ride it. And coming to like rock climbing next, on-site free soloing would be the nearest thing that I could equate to that. And there are very few people that have survived through on-site free soloing. And that even has the potential to be backed off of. You on-site free solo a route and you come to a move that you can't do, well, you can back down the climb, and hopefully you've climbed the first section in a manner that you can reverse the moves. But there is absolutely no reverse in a wingsuit. So I don't know. I'm not in his shoes, so I can't tell you like whether whether it looks sustainable or not. From my perspective, it seems on the aggressive end.
I mean, I think we both put it fairly succinctly that he is on the sharp end of the sport at the moment, and that's what it looks like, and that sharp end is a difficult balance point sometimes.
Yeah. End of the day, I'm super stoked that we had him on the podcast, and absolutely blown away at the amount of information that he's given us, as well as all of the stuff that he's done to push the sport forward. So,
yeah,
congratulations to us for being able to put him on the podcast and get all of that awesome information out of him.
Yeah, that was cool. Definitely stoked on that. And that sort of wraps up our episode for today. And yeah, looking forward to the next one.